Welcome into CBS News 24/7. I'm Juliette Goodrich. Wall Street clocked out and we are clocked in. President Trump puts pressure on Russia to end the war in Ukraine, but could a deal be made between Moscow and Kyiv? We're also following some breaking news. This out of Florida. Several people injured after a shooting at a used car dealership. We have the latest. And a Detroit delivery driver deported after reportedly making a wrong turn and ending up in Canada. You are watching CBS News 24/7. We start at the White House where President Trump sat down with Norway's Prime Minister. A key topic of conversation, ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump said he has, quote, no allegiance to either side. He just wants to stop the war. And he said he's putting pressure on Russia to do it.
We're putting a lot of pressure.
Can you maybe tell us what kind of pressure are you putting on Russia?
And Russia knows that, and some people that are close to it know, or he wouldn't be talking right now. The Prime Minister understands that better than anybody. He wouldn't be talking right now. He's talking. And we're putting a lot of pressure. I think he wants to make a deal. We're going to find out very soon. But it takes two to tango. And you have to have Ukraine want to make a deal, too. And they're being hit very hard. And I do believe they want to make a deal.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joining us now. Thanks for being here, Willie. What can we make of this meeting today?
Hey there, Jules. Good to be with you on this Thursday. Losing track of my days here. Well, President Trump was meeting with the Prime Minister of Norway, which, of course, is a member of NATO and shares a lengthy border with Russia. So they are perhaps concerned about Russia aggression. And the president essentially saying that he believes that there's a deal to be made here. But when he was asked specifics about concessions, what concessions is Russia giving up? Listen to what he had to say.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, stopping taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
Now, a part of the concern for the Ukrainians is potentially down the road that the United States, other countries, but more specifically the United States, could potentially want to recognize Crimea. Of course, that was part of Ukraine that was annexed by the Russians during the start of this conflict. The president oftentimes will blame his predecessors, including President Obama. That is, during his presidency, Crimea was annexed during that time, and President Biden, of course, which under his term the war started. But still, nonetheless, the president going forward with these potential conversations. In fact, we just heard from the Secretary General of NATO, who didn't want to get into specifics either. I asked him specifically about concessions, if the Ukrainians have made concessions, if the Russians have made concessions. He said he didn't want to get ahead of those conversations that are happening in Europe right now between the Russians and Ukrainians. Of course, the Americans are part of these discussions as well, part of these conversations. And when you look at it as a total diplomatic effort by the U.S. and other allied nations to bring a stop to this conflict, the Europeans are focused on this as well. And the Secretary General mentioned that the Europeans need to do more for their own security, spend more of their tax dollars on security, specifically military security in that part of the world, as the U.S. looks to potentially pull back on its military presence and spending and things such as that in Europe. So the president asked about that earlier today, asked about those conversations. We, of course, know that the White House is still moving forward with that, but only time will tell if the U.S. remains committed to these conversations, because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, hinted that the U.S. wouldn't necessarily wait around forever, summing up his words in terms of those ongoing negotiations between Russia and Ukraine.
So, Willie, let's talk about the trade standoff with China. Trump insists trade meetings with China are underway, but China said those conversations aren't happening. So what is going on?
Yeah, it's a little bit of, mixed reactions, mixed words. We, of course, know that the U.S. has put punishing tariffs on Chinese goods, 145% if you include the fentanyl tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that the administration announced weeks ago. Beijing has put forward their own reciprocal tariffs, or in retaliation, I should say, for what the U.S. did. And the president was asked about those ongoing conversations about whether or not they're taking place. Listen to what he said.
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is. We may reveal it later, but they had meetings this morning, and we've been meeting with China. And so I think you have, Jeff, as usual, I think you have your reporting wrong.
Now, the point of all this is that the Chinese say, Beijing says, this isn't happening, that these conversations aren't happening. So it's unclear in terms of what the president is talking about there. Still, nonetheless, some type of deal will need to be made if the U.S. were to release or ease its tariff burden on Chinese goods, and for the Chinese to do the same. We already know that some companies are in the middle of this. Boeing, which, of course, as you know, sells planes around the world, not only to American airlines, but to Chinese airlines as well. Some of those jets have simply been refused and sent back in part of a reaction from this tariff war that we've been seeing play out between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, okay. Also, I wanted to ask you, someone else at the White House today, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's unclear when Mr. Goldberg will be here. We haven't seen him, at least I haven't seen him here on the White House grounds as of yet. But the president did mention that meeting that's set to take place between Goldberg and a few other journalists. This is essentially an interview. The president talked about this a little bit in the social media post, hoping that it's a fair interview. But the reason why it's important is because of the timing of all of this, right? Jeffrey Goldberg was added to that Signal chat, seen and I guess heard, or mostly seen around the world. He was inadvertently added by the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, in this case, and he released some of the details of those conversations in his report. We, of course, know that it included sensitive information, military timing and targets, the types of jets that would be used, that information, most of it added by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. That was the first Signal chat. Now we know about another Signal chat, according to sources aware of the matter, who tell CBS News that the Secretary of Defense had a separate Signal chat that included his wife, his brother, and his lawyer at the Defense Department. So a lot to be heard, or a lot to be read into Signalgate, but the timing itself, with Mr. Goldberg being here at the White House, talking to President Trump, interviewing President Trump along with his colleagues, is really just interesting, to say the least, Jules.
Yeah, absolutely. Willie James Inman, thank you so much for all of that information. All right, we are watching Wall Street as investors react to these headlines. The closing bell rang just moments ago, so the Dow is up more than 1%. So let's take a look at our interactive stock market heat map. This is brought to you by FinViz. It is showing the top 500 stocks. So as you can see, some of the big names actually landed in the green today. Tech giants like Nvidia, Meta, Amazon, and Tesla, right now they are all trading higher. So CBS News contributor J.D. Durkin joining us live from the New York Stock Exchange. Hey there, J.D., how's it going? Let's talk big tech. Investors, though, still grasping for certainty, although it was up today.
Well, Jules said they may be trying to grasp for certainty, but until they get full certainty and full answers, I'm sure they're more than willing to take at least a little bit of green on the big board. And now we've got 3 consecutive sessions here on Wall Street for both the S&P 500 as well as the tech-heavy NASDAQ, finishing in positive territory. And when we talk about the overall stock market, Jules, we cannot ignore how heavily concentrated, or in other words, how important or weighted these big tech names are. Nvidia up today 3.6%, rather. Tesla up 3.5%. Similar story for Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and Google. These are the most important names in both the NASDAQ 100 as well as the S&P 500. And we can't forget, we're also in the middle of earnings season for a lot of these big companies. As these companies move, so too move the markets. Kind of disappointing earnings announced earlier this week from Tesla, but investors taking solace in the fact Elon Musk plans to spend at least a little less time focused on the Trump White House, a little more time on Tesla, and we're set to hear from the folks over at Google in the next few minutes as well. And hopefully they get a little more answers with regards to tariff uncertainty, but they'll certainly take some positive sessions here on Wall Street until they get those answers.
Yeah, everyone is looking for answers. We're also hearing from some major U.S. companies, JD, on the potential impact of Trump's tariffs. And some shoppers saying that the store shelves could be empty or soon to be. What are we hearing from investors on that?
Well, I think in particular, you're going to follow automotive names, you're going to follow a lot of manufacturing names, and then, of course, the retailers. These are, without a doubt, going to be the sectors and some of the household, most consumer-facing brands that are expected to be most significantly, perhaps negatively impacted by the White House's tariff announcement. And I think the real concern for a lot of those companies is that when they are faced with those rising prices is going to be the inevitability of, yes, maybe absorbing some of those costs themselves, and maybe the exporters pick up some costs, but inevitably passing those costs down onto the consumer. And for an already distressed consumer, the way we are seeing with regards to things like credit card defaults or credit card delinquencies, a lot of these consumer-facing sectors and household names and publicly traded companies, they are wondering about the impact of how tariffs may further distress an already distressed consumer. So as we have certainly said more than once the last few weeks, uncertainty is the name of the game. And as earnings season rolls on, Jules, there's no doubt we're going to hear a lot of those questions, likely more questions than answers from a lot of these CEOs of those very companies.
Oh boy, and we all look to you for answers every single day. JD Durkin, thank you so much for everything you give us today, the insight. All right, a number of nonprofit safety and crime victims groups say the Department of Justice is cutting their federal grant funding. One group, the National Center for Victims of Crime, say it will have to shutter its hotline service as soon as Friday. So CBS News Department of Justice reporter Scott McFarland joining us live now. Scott, I know you've been following this story. So what do we know about the cuts to funding right now?
Yeah, as of Tuesday, federal grants through the U.S. Department of Justice have been chopped off for a number of crime victims nonprofits, the kind of groups that set up support services for people who are victims of crimes, including children who are victims of crimes. One of the largest is that National Crime Victim Center, which is based in Maryland, and told CBS News this afternoon they will have to shutter their crime victims hotline, which we learned was used 16,000 times last year alone because of the funding. We have an Oakland, California-based group, Youth Alive, which helps children victims of crime, saying this is a devastating blow to them to lose the federal money. The U.S. Department of Justice did not immediately respond to requests for comment from CBS News about why these grants are being cut off, but we're seeing this pop up from nonprofit organizations from coast to coast. The grants, according to the paperwork they're receiving from the Department of Justice, doesn't, quote, effectuate priorities of the Department of Justice. This is a problem we expect will hit other nonprofits, or at least the news of this hitting other nonprofits will surface before the weekend.
Scott, here's an interesting one. A judge has actually temporarily halted her own order requiring information on efforts to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So what is the reasoning behind that pause?
There's something curious here in this new national story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man mistakenly deported from Maryland to El Salvador on March 15th on those deportation flights. The judge, after receiving 2 sealed court filings on Wednesday over this case, said she was pushing back a deadline for the Department of Justice and the administration to answer a whole bunch of questions about Abrego Garcia from yesterday until Wednesday, April 30. The deadline's been pushed, with both sides saying they agree to it, indicating there may be some possible agreement between attorneys representing Abrego Garcia and attorneys representing the Trump administration. We don't know the contours or whether there is for sure an agreement, but this indicates there's been some change in this case, but it could be until Wednesday the 30th we find out.
Okay, and we understand a judge is blocking some of Trump's administration's attempts to overhaul our elections. So what is happening there?
Well, you need a really big spreadsheet to track all these court cases, 200 plus as of now. This one's back here in Washington, D.C. A federal judge has ruled there should be a freeze on the president's executive order on federal elections. Among other things in this executive order, requires a proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections. What the judge is saying here is what Trump's critics have been saying ever since he put pen to paper on this executive order, that voting rules, voting regulations are the business of the Congress or the states and local communities. that it's an overreach by the administration to try to put forward that kind of executive order. It's on hold. So many of these challenges to Trump administration executive orders have put temporary freezes on those orders, not permanent ones, though.
All right, Scott McFarland, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. Appreciate it. We're going to go to a live look now at the Vatican, where tens of thousands of people are visiting to pay their respects to Pope Francis. So we want to give you an overview of the events that are playing out in Vatican City for the late Pope. So right now, tens of thousands of the faithful are paying their respects here inside St. Peter's Basilica. On Saturday, church and world leaders will congregate at St. Peter's for the funeral mass, and the public will then gather in St. Peter's Square. So in a break with recent tradition, the Pope will not be buried here at the Vatican. Instead, he asked to be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major across Rome. And then the cardinal electors will gather here at the Sistine Chapel for the conclave, which must begin within 15 to 20 days of the Pope's death. The cardinals will be sealed off from the world to start the process of selecting the next pope by casting secret ballots until a pope is chosen. Before all of that happens, those cardinals need to review protocols. The group met this morning for their third general congregation meeting. They discussed details of conclave, including who will give meditations. The cardinals will meet for another congregation tomorrow. Crowds continue to gather to say their goodbyes to Pope Francis. But as CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay reports, the numbers are just a fraction of what the previous Pope had.
Yeah, take a look around me. This exact spot was jam-packed with people last night, lining up to see the body of Pope Francis lying in state inside of St. Peter's Basilica. But right now, it's really thinned out. There's no line around me whatsoever, and the numbers reflect that. According to the Vatican, 50,000 people walked by the body of Pope Francis in the first 24 hours. It sounds impressive, but you compare that to John Paul II when he died, and it was 10 times that number. 500,000 people walked by John Paul II to see his body in the first 24 hours. Now, what does that say? Why aren't as many people coming? You can wonder why. I mean, John Paul II was this victorious pope, seen as being a conqueror of communism. Also, he was Polish, and so many of his supporters were from nearby Poland. They could come here by bus, whereas Francis, he was Argentinian, and he was serving people in the periphery. And these are people who, by very definition, are further away, and it's harder for them to come out here. There are a lot of reasons to suspect why this might be the case. But the big question is, what kind of impact is it going to have on the conclave? That's the process by which cardinals decide who the next pope is going to be. Are they going to look around at these numbers and the fact that people just aren't lining up in the same way to see Pope Francis as they did for John Paul II? John Paul II was a conservative Catholic. Francis was seen as being more progressive. Is this going to be seen as a rebuke of his policies? Are they going to look at the lack of crowds here and think maybe it's time for a change? Maybe it's time that the church is changing, and therefore we as cardinals need to make a shift as well. Only time will tell. We'll find out when that white smoke comes up over the Sistine Chapel. Back to you.
And we will bring you the funeral of Pope Francis on Saturday in a CBS News special report. Coverage starts at 4 a.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. Pacific on CBS and streaming right here on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount+. Witnesses testify in the Karen Reed murder trial. The text messages detailing the final moments before John O'Keefe's death. Next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. We are following breaking news out of Florida, where an investigation is underway right now after a workplace shooting in southwest Miami-Dade. Police say at least 3 people have been taken to the hospital, including the suspected shooter. So CBS News Miami is covering the story. Let's take a listen to their coverage.
I'm going to walk over right now. We spoke with a father just a few minutes ago. We interviewed him, and I want to see if he'd speak with us live because he was actually on the phone. He seemed very concerned, and I asked him, is everything okay? He says, yes, as a matter of fact, I am speaking with my son, who is actually in there. Let's see if he can give us a few minutes. Hi, Ivan. and we're live right now with CBS News Miami. I'm sorry, can you share with us again our conversation and with your son? What happened?
I got a text from him earlier that there was a shooting, that there was police around. He was in a gym working out. He was hiding with his gym coach and his partners there, his workout partners there, until police were able to take him out safely, escorted him out to safety. I understand he's still under custody now, waiting to be released.
How terrifying is as a parent? We've been through the shooting in FSU, and then you get a text from your son saying, Dad, there was a shooting very close by.
Don't think there's a text that can be more terrifying. I think it's hard to swallow.
So right now you're just waiting for him to come. You're waiting to be with him. What did he say? How is he feeling? What's going through his mind right now?
He's nervous. He's anxious. He wants to go home. But he's feeling good. He's feeling safe. There's a wonderful police presence here. They acted quickly, and I'm very grateful for the rapid response of the police force here. I think that's helping him to feel safe.
And the moment that he called you, you said, I have to go. I have to be there.
Absolutely. It wasn't hesitation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I heard a very shaken up father. He was standing next to me talking on the phone, and I can tell that he was very, very worried for his son. Again, he was explaining that his son was at a gym very close to where the shooting happened.
All right, that was CBS News Miami covering the shooting at a used car dealership. We will continue to monitor this developing story and bring you the latest. We now head to Detroit, where a wrong turn led to a deportation when a Venezuelan immigrant ended up on the Ambassador Bridge between the United States and Canada. He ended up getting detained on the way back to the United States and then ultimately deported. CBS News Detroit's Elaine Rojas Castillo joins us live near the port of entry in Detroit. So, Elaine, how did all of this happen?
Well, Jules, accidentally driving over the Ambassador Bridge, which is the one-way toll road between the U.S. and Canada, is a pretty common mistake for Detroiters. But for that 32-year-old Venezuelan immigrant, that mistake completely changed his life. Back in January, Ricardo Prada Vasquez reportedly went the wrong way while delivering a food order and ended up crossing the Canadian border. He was taken into custody by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol authorities and deported to El Salvador. Representatives with the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center say the most unusual part of this case was that he was deported without due process, citing the, quote, black hole of information for immigrants held at detention centers for days without a system in place to handle the overflow.
I have no doubt that CBP staff are doing their best under the circumstances to provide the best care for the people in their custody. But that is not CBP's mission, and we worry about what is happening in these non-public spaces, given the almost non-existent transparency, accountability, and access.
A CBP spokesperson did get back to us and sent a statement saying that officers determine a traveler's, quote, admissibility to the country based on an inspection process. And if they aren't able to give valid documentation or establish what they call, quote, a lawful basis to remain or enter into the country, they may be subject to due process under what's called the Immigration and Nationality Act. And through that process, they may be subject for immediate removal. Jules?
Elaine Rojas Castillo, thank you so much. All right, let's bring up our TikTok tube. Our CBS News social team has some great content, including this. Kilmore Abrego Garcia having MS-13 tattoos on his hand as President Trump claims. So CBS News confirmed team looked into this. Here is Alex Clark.
So President Trump tweeted this image, claiming that a Maryland man named Kilmore Abrego Garcia had, quote, MS-13 tattooed to his knuckles. But it's not accurate. Abrego Garcia was one of more than 200 men deported to El Salvador in March. This image does not match any of the other known images of Abrego Garcia's hands. We analyzed it, and here's what we found. The image Trump shared includes the letters MS-13 at the top of the hand, as well as labels beneath the tattoos. But in this photo, taken during a meeting with Senator Chris Van Hollen, those markings aren't there. Same with this older photo posted by Abrego Garcia's wife in 2019. It's unclear who added the labels, but they don't appear in any of the verified images of Abrego Garcia that we found. They've been digitally added. Some people actually believe that the letters MS-13 were tattooed on his hands. In this close-up, you can see a smiley face, a skull, a cross, and a leaf which the Trump administration has identified as marijuana, which starts with the letter M. But experts say that MS-13 gang members often tattoo M, MS, or 13 very clearly on their body, along with imagery of the devil, which does not appear in any of these photos. We've reached out to the White House and have not gotten a response. Abrego Garcia had been granted legal protection from deportation to El Salvador in 2019, and his attorneys maintain that he is not an MS-13 gang member. And he's still detained in El Salvador, despite a federal judge ruling that the Trump administration must act to facilitate his return, as well as update them on the steps they're taking.
The CBS News Confirmed team has much more on their social accounts. That's on TikTok and on Instagram, so be sure to follow them online if you haven't already. All right, we now head to Massachusetts, where testimony resumes today in the retrial of Karen Reed, the woman accused of killing her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. CBS News Boston's Christina Rex was in court and has the latest.
An unexpectedly brief yet jam-packed day of testimony. It's day 3 of Karen Reed's retrial for second-degree murder, among other charges. Today, the jury got to hear the final text messages and phone calls between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe before John O'Keefe died. So the day started with Canton paramedic and firefighter Daniel Whitley back on the stand from yesterday for more cross-examination. Whitley had testified that while he was treating Karen Reed for psychiatric reasons on that fateful morning, that she had asked him how long it might take John to die from hypothermia. The defense pushed him on whether his story had changed. Then the jury got to hear a clip played from a recent documentary series in which Karen Reed imitates John O'Keefe's mother. This video had been a point of contention, and Karen Reed's team did not want it played during her trial, but the judge allowed it. Then the day ended with State Trooper Nicholas Guarino again on the stand. He's one of those witnesses who's going to be brought back recalled several times over the course of this trial, because he's the person who extracted information from the cell phones of everyone involved. So today he read text messages and referenced phone calls between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe on the final day of John O'Keefe's life. These messages showed that the couple had been fighting over John O'Keefe's niece and nephew, who he took care of. John O'Keefe even said in the text that things had not been good in their relationship for quite a while. Karen Reed then asked him if he was interested in another woman. And this is a disagreement that really continued all day into the night, of course, leading into Karen Reed then meeting John O'Keefe out at a bar, the couple spending the night together. Ultimately, she drops him off at that home in Canton and hours later discovers his body dead on the front lawn in a pile of snow. But those texts and calls were not the final testimony today. Before the jury left, they heard several minutes more of Karen Reed's media interviews from several different interviews where she talks about the number of drinks she consumed that night, anywhere from 4 to 9, depending on the interview clip. She talks about how she felt buzzed in those interviews, and she also says that she shouldn't have been driving on the expressway, which she didn't, but that she said she remembers that she drove carefully even though she was buzzed that night. So that's what the jury was left with. Tomorrow, the jury will get to visit the alleged crime scene. Back to you.
Taking you now to New Jersey, where the Jones Road wildfire explodes in size overnight. Officials say a suspect has been charged with aggravated arson and arson in connection to this fire. 19-year-old Joseph Kling is accused of setting wooden pallets on fire and failing to extinguish them fully before leaving the scene. The fire has now engulfed more than 15,000 acres. Excuse me. So moments ago, the New Jersey Forest Service chief and Ocean County prosecutor gave updates on the fire. The prosecutor talked about how investigators identified the suspect. So let's take a listen.
Publicly that we were able to place him at the scene, and we have some witness statements that corroborate that. Can somebody go, like, who's in charge?
How confident are you that this was intentionally set rather than an accidental starting of a fire, and how do you know that?
Very confident.
Has he admitted to it?
I can't discuss that at this time. I'm sorry.
All right, meteorologist Darren Peck joining me now. This is a good time to talk about the smoke in that area specifically related to the fire.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we always think about is what's happening on the ground.
Sure.
There are thousands of people who've been evacuated because of this fire, and that's kind of like the foremost concern. But if you do a little perspective on the numbers, there are millions of people that are now at risk of breathing in poor air quality from this. This is something that this part of the country got a lot of experience with in summers past when the Canadian wildfires were throwing a lot of smoke at the major population centers of the Northeast. If we take a look at the futurecast on here of how the smoke's going to get pushed around over the next couple of days, there are two surges of smoke that are likely going to keep moving up towards New York. In fact, today it's Long Island. Tomorrow it could be New York City. If we can use the forecast imagery over my shoulder back here, and what we're going to put is the high-resolution imagery and come in for a slightly closer view so we can get a better handle on where that very narrow plume of smoke is going to go. That's the later part of today. So what you've got is a plume of smoke going right over Long Island. They've already got air quality advisories here. They're already registering unhealthy air quality for sensitive groups. And then tomorrow, you see the colors start to deepen. This is as we get into late now on Friday, and there's almost this extra concentrated plume of smoke that's going right over New York. Now, there is some good news here. What you're seeing on there is ground at the smoke at the ground level. Whether or not you get a big inundation of smoke through this part of the country, at the upper levels of the atmosphere, it's going to be spreading out. So you're going to see this stuff. It's going to look kind of ominous in the sky over the next few days. And then by Saturday, there's good news. Good news because there's a lot of nasty weather in the midsection of the country right now. Unfortunately, we're going to be seeing some pretty strong thunderstorms through the mid-section of the country. But let's come back to the virtual map, because if we take the story from today, the weather here that we're keeping an eye on for severe thunderstorms will actually do a favor for the northeastern United States as we get to Saturday. Watch this kind of blow up. It loses its intensity, but it keeps the rain, and then it brings that rain right in across the part of the country that needs it most. So we really have to get through about the next 24 to 36 hours here from a wildfire and smoke perspective, and then we are going to put a lot of very helpful, much-needed rain on those fires. All right, Juliet, back to you.
Darren, thank you. Could Google be forced to break up? The fight playing out in court right now, and our exclusive interview with a top DOJ antitrust official next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. In Washington, a courtroom face-off continues between Google and the Justice Department. The fate of Google search lies in the hands of a federal judge who will decide the best solution to Google's monopoly in internet search. So let's bring in tech journalist Yasmin Khorram. And Yasmin, you got an exclusive interview, I might add, with the top DOJ antitrust official. So what did you learn from that interview?
Yes, learned a lot. So two major cases have landed two tech giants, Meta and Google, in courtrooms where they're essentially fighting to survive in their current form. Google has already lost twice to the DOJ, and this week we've been watching. They're in the remedy trial, and the Justice Department wants Google to divest its super popular browser, Chrome. A little backstory on this. This case started during Trump's first term, and it was litigated during Biden's. The previous administration wanted Google to divest its AI investments as part of its remedies. This administration took that off the table. So as we're watching Google's fate kind of hang in the balance, I sat down with top Trump DOJ antitrust official Omid Assefi to talk about all of this and Google's remedies. Here's what he said.
So I think what you see out of the proposed remedies submitted by the Trump administration, you see a significant effort to make sure that the remedies that are sought are tailored to the specific opinion from the judge, in this case, Judge Mehta, and making sure that the remedies seek to fix the unlawful conduct that he found in his opinion.
So Assefi told me it's more about fixing the problem than punishing the company.
Okay, so let's talk about big tech. All eyes on big tech. What did he say about President Trump's stance on big tech?
We talked about that, and I also asked him specifically about whether Trump and the White House weigh in on what these remedies should be or what company the DOJ should look into. He said he does not hear from the White House. Here's what he told me about what big tech should expect in the next 4 years.
Aggressive enforcement is here to stay. And so what you'll find are people who don't wake up in the morning looking to tear down tech companies and tear down American innovation. In fact, what you'll see is a group of people who strongly believe that the best remedy for American innovation and for the American marketplace is to have open competition with companies.
And in terms of that aggressive stance, Jules, we're already seeing it.
Right.
We're seeing the DOJ, the FTC going after two of the most valuable companies in the world.
Yeah, that was good information. I'm sure you got so much more. And we can share that. You can catch Yasmin's entire exclusive interview on her Substack, The Y Access. Go to yasmincorum.substack.com. Thank you for bringing us that interview.
Sure,
All
thanks.
right. Okay, the NFL draft kicks off tonight in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Who are this year's favorites and who to watch out for? That's next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. With the Real ID deadline now just weeks away, Americans across the country line up at DMV offices to get their new driver's license. But in Florida, one woman says she's caught in limbo. Jeanette Gant Palmer, born during the Jim Crow era in Aiken County, South Carolina, was never issued a birth certificate. Without it, the DMV won't renew her license.
After waiting 2 hours in the line, I said, I'd like to renew my driver's license. Oh no, we need this and we need that. For what? What reason? I never had it before. In those days, we were born at home. You didn't know about going to no hospital. The lady came to your house to help your mom have the baby.
Gant Palmer says she's been trying to get a birth certificate her whole life. Her niece, Florida State Representative Ashley Gant, is trying to help. She got her aunt a 90-day extension and is working with members of Congress to get her a birth certificate and passport. All right, the NFL draft kicks off in just a few hours in Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the Packers. So this will be the first time the draft has been held in Wisconsin since 1940. But of course, football fans all over the country are eagerly awaiting to hear who their favorite teams got in the draft. CBS News Minnesota reporter Ren Clayton joining us now at the, draft party, if you might call it. So I know the fans aren't there yet, but if the Vikings had the first pick, who would they take and who are some of the top picks? Oh, I think he's waiting to hear if he can hear me. I hear music, though. That does sound like a draft
Hello,
party.
yeah, we are here in downtown
good.
Minneapolis at US Bank Stadium, and it is a draft night for the Minnesota Vikings and the rest of the teams in the NFL. Of course, the NFL draft first round is tonight just across the border in Wisconsin, in Green Bay. There will be hundreds of thousands of people here, and here there will be a Vikings draft party. The Vikings, of course, went 8-1 in this stadium at home in this beautiful US Bank Stadium, and they will draft number 24th overall in the draft tonight. Of course, there's always the chance they trade down, trade up. They only have 4 overall picks in this draft that runs through Saturday, so it should be an interesting few days for the Minnesota Vikings, who, of course, had a very good season but had a disappointing finish in the first round of the playoffs this past fall. Now let's take a look around. We got this whole build out. We got the stage over here. This is not what we're going to see at Lambeau Field later tonight, but this is US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. They will have tons of Vikings alumni. Jared Allen's on the list. Randall Cunningham's on the list. There's a lot of people getting ready and getting all set up. There will be dozens of Vikings fans crowding into this US Bank Stadium. We see the windows and a whole bunch of different things, some activities, some vendors and games to be played, DJ and everything that comes with a Vikings game, except for the football field. This is where the turf is. We're about the 50-yard line right here. In a little bit, this will be full of people getting ready to watch the Vikings make their selection in a few hours in the first round. Now, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the Vikings general manager, is in his now 4th year drafting, in his 4th draft with this job, of course, alongside Kevin O'Connell, KOC, as they call him. He's had some good picks and some not so good picks, and some ones that we've not really seen how it will turn out yet. But this year, it's interesting because the free agency period, they were very busy, making really 4 big signings, 2 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen, big free agency signings. And so there's not a whole lot of dire need for the Minnesota Vikings. So they could potentially, if it's the theory and strategy that they decide to go with, just draft the best available player at 24 if they do end up picking at that spot. So we shall see. One guy I like that I think a lot of people like is Georgia safety. Malachi Starks played nickel last year. Really versatile, versatile, can play a lot of places. We know Cam Bynum left the Vikings. He was a safety, went to the Indianapolis Colts, signed a big deal there. So there is a hole there in the secondary for the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see what they go with as the draft gets underway in just a few hours. Jules?
All right, you're at the pre-party spot. Thank you, Ren Clayton. Appreciate it. Pop star Katy Perry facing a lawsuit. Why her name is getting the attention of Australia's highest court. Next, you're watching CBS News 24/7. Moments ago, Senator Mitch McConnell answered questions about how much power the president should hold when it comes to implementing tariffs. Let's take a listen.
There is legislation out there that would essentially wrestle some of the power from the president to Congress on whether tariffs can be issued or not. Is that something that you would support in the Senate to come forward as an ability to kind of wrangle the Trump administration?
Yeah, that obviously won't become law, but it's taking a look at the wisdom exercised initially by having all of this power in the presidency. And it was an indication of those of us who thought we ought to take another look at the way we currently handle tariffs. It's not an anti-Trump thing, in my opinion, but a structural thing. Should the president have 100% of the authority in this particular area? And I think some of us think Congress probably ought to have some impact on that.
News we're following around the world. India's Kashmir territory is completely shut down 2 days after militants killed 26 people. India has blamed Pakistan for the attack and suspended a key water treaty. Both India and Pakistan have claimed Kashmir, but in 2019, the Indian government revoked its semi-autonomous status and increased security. Now Pakistan is closing airspace to Indian airlines and suspending trade with India. In Israel, people stopped what they were doing and stood still as sirens sounded to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. The 2-minute siren sounds in memory of the 6 million Jews killed by Nazis. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other dignitaries laid a wreath to remember the lives lost to the Holocaust. Some of the people held hostage by Hamas joined Holocaust survivors at the March of the Living memorial ceremony at the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. Nazi Germany killed at least 1.2 million people at Auschwitz, most of them Jews. Others killed included political prisoners, Romani people, and people with disabilities.
What's up, man? Sir. All right. Drinking on the job, I see. Now that the tour is over. That's right.
In Germany, Vice President J.D. Vance met with U.S. service members during a pit stop at Ramstein Air Base. He shook hands with the troops before serving them beer in plastic cups. The second family attended a private lunch shortly after before starting their trip back to Washington. Now onto a legal battle between Katy Perry and Katy Perry. And you heard that right. One is a pop star who just went to space. The other is a clothing designer in Australia. The case has ping-ponged in the Australian court system for years. The designer initially won the case, but last year, an appeals court overturned that decision. Australia's High Court now decides who gets to claim the name. And take a look at these images released by NASA today. The agency captured these stunning pictures using the Hubble Space Telescope. It launched into Earth's orbit 35 years ago today. America Decides with Major Garrett is next with a deeper dive on the U.S. stock market and the economy's volatility. And we leave you now with a live look at Vatican City, where tens of thousands coming to say a final goodbye to the late Pope Francis. The Pope will lie in state for 2 more days at St. Peter's Basilica. Then on Friday night, his coffin will be sealed. Around 170 dignitaries and heads of the state, including the president, will attend. You're watching CBS News 24/7.